Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, a podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. Now, this week we've got an episode all about focusing our attention and taking control of our own professional development. And as we start to shift our minds towards the 24-25 academic year, I thought it'd be a great time to share this chat, which was previously only available for Ko-fi listeners and Ko-fi subscribers. So, without further ado, let's spend some time thinking deeply about primary education. So, we're going to look at taking charge of our own professional development. Chris, you're going to co-host a bit of this one for me. So, the first question is, why is it important to be involved in our professional development? So we've got Adam, who is a year 5 teacher and subject leader in London. We've got Chris, obviously author, teacher, and part-time Ambition Institute. Tom, deputy head teacher in just Cambridgeshire. And then Seb, you're a year 1, year 2 teacher in Nuremberg.
Yeah. At the moment, I'm in a mixed age year 1, year 2 class.
Nice. Awesome. Cool. So first question, why is it important to be involved in our professional development? So I'll throw out your way, Seb, to start off with.
Well, I think in the end, it's my responsibility. If I want to be the best teacher I can be, so I need to look for ways how I can improve this I want to improve. So if I would just sit aside and wait for other people to tell me what I should improve or what I could do better, I think it's so important that I get involved and see, okay, what I want to get better in. I want to then make sure I see what is out there where I can get the expertise from other people to improve.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that, as a teacher, as a senior leader, we want what's best for the children in our care, the children that we teach. And to do that, we have to be the best that we can be. We have to try our best. And we have to really think carefully about what it is that we find easy and find less easy in our job. And it's harder for somebody else to dictate that to us. For someone to say, I really think you need to work on the way you check for understanding towards the end of your topic lessons. Well, there needs to be a dialogue there. Am I finding that difficult? I thought I was being quite effective in that area, actually. So what are you seeing that I'm not seeing? I don't want my professional development dictated to me, but I want a guide. I want someone on my side, someone who can help me think about my practice, help me to endeavour to improve. So, I think Seb's spot on.
Would I be right in thinking that, or at least I know it kind of feels like it's linked to me, but is there an element where motivation comes into play, whereby if we're in charge of our professional development, it kind of hits slightly differently in terms of how you want to do it? Or is that kind of misplaced? What do you reckon?
I don't know if you can hear me. Hello?
I can hear you okay. At the moment, at least.
So for me, there's definitely a distinction between something that you're told to do and something you want to do, isn't there? I mean, I've just finished doing an MPQ, and as much as I thought it was a good experience, portions of it felt like a big chore because it was something I already knew about or something I wasn't particularly interested in, or just it felt like a chore because I was being told to do it. But what we're talking about is this kind of self-selected, or at least guided by other people but selected by ourselves approach to CPD. And but then even that has to be quite chosen. I worked in a school where we were given a CPD journal and given a lot of freedom to go and do it. But when it's even prescribed to that level, it doesn't feel as not fun. But I like that element that it's something I do in my spare time. That's my hobby, because it makes it feel more. I don't know, enjoyable is a strange word for something related to your professional work, but it does make it feel more enjoyable.
Yeah, I know from my experience that when I've I guess this isn't just professional development, but actually almost learning anything where I felt like I've had to do it. I've almost been counting the hours, and whereas I've ended up doing kind of quite a lot of time. I've devoted quite a lot of time to certain things purely because it's something that I've taken to it myself. I mean, a really bad analogy, but I'm going to go with it. I learned to play 2 instruments as a kid, and one of them, clarinet, was this weekly thing. I had to do it. There was a structure. These were the pieces of music I needed to learn, and there was a little bit of choice in there. But I basically learned to hate it. It learned to become something, and whereas learning to play guitar, which was totally my own thing, I could stop whenever I wanted to stop. I could, obsess about it whenever I wanted to obsess about it. I ended up devoting ridiculous amounts of time to it in comparison to these clarinet lessons that I'd been that people were paying for. So yeah, I do think it feels very different when you've got that own sense of when it's coming from you. And that obviously ties into the kind of flexibility that you can have with it as well. I wonder whether there's a sense as well that by taking charge of it yourself and it being to a much greater extent yours, you're then more able to support other teachers with that thing. I know where I've done professional development and it's been kind of not done to me, but done with me, directed by other people. I've not then felt as confident in talking about it with other people. I've not engaged with it in the same way to allow me to do that. Is that just me, or do any of you have any of you had similar experiences?
I think to some degree it depends where you're at in your career and kind of your level of comfort within the job. I think that's more likely to be the case for those teachers who, feel fairly confident in the classroom and feel like they can be empowered to take on that bit ownership a bit more. Whereas for the inexpert teacher, the trainee teacher, the ECT, then that might be too much leeway. It might be too much to say, right, off you go, here's everything you need, see you later. And then when you figured that out, come and tell the rest of us. I think there's a degree to which we need to help steer our colleagues in thinking about their professional development as well. And I said it previously, but to me it comes down to capacity. How much can I take on right now? How much can we take on right now? How much can we focus at any one time? And sometimes it really helps to have a coach or a mentor or someone to have that dialogue with about how much should we invest ourselves into this right now? And what's our goal? Do we have to fix a weekly schedule on this? Do we have to fix this is something we want to get in place by the end of the term? To me, I'm always thinking long game. If you want to stick with teaching, it's a great career. It's a really long career. So sometimes if you want to do it, what's the rush? If you want to get better at this thing, what's the rush? Why do we have to give ourselves, right, in 3 weeks' time, we're going to be great at this thing? Because it might be unrealistic and it might become a chore. So whilst there are uses in timescales, particularly if your school follows some form of instructional coaching or mentoring, those kind of things, it can help to have regular slots. I'd always caveat that with the flexibility that's required.
Can I ask the flip side to that maybe then, which is it possible, do you think, for a relatively experienced teacher to be, passive is possibly the wrong word, but a relatively experienced teacher just to say, you know what, fairly happy with where I'm in my career. You're providing professional development that relates to what we're doing in school. I don't feel the need to take this upon myself to kind of dictate it in any way. Do you think that's necessarily wrong or a bad thing? Or are there circumstances under which a more experienced teacher can be fine in saying, no, just tell me what to learn, direct me right now, because that's okay?
I think for me, we forget what it's like at the very beginning of your career. I mean, I don't forget because it wasn't super long ago, but you kind of forget that when you're right there as a novice, you make huge improvements in your teaching practice. Literally, I know Tom was saying it doesn't happen day to day, but reading something, putting it into practice, you can see, at least I did, see improvements really fast. And I'm kind of realizing that again, working with an ECT, that you can go in and coach them and say, here's a really practical technique to try. And it makes the difference between them being able to get a class silent and not being able to have a silent class. It makes the difference between a piece of writing that reflects what they've learned and a piece of writing that's kind of, you're a bit like, oh. So at that early stage in your career, obviously you're naturally more receptive to other ideas anyway, because you're in a novice position, you don't feel like you have a particular amount of expertise. And you see those huge improvements as well. And the chances as your career goes along, I sort of see it like it goes up in terms of expertise really sharply, but then you bump along for a long time without making any different, not improvements necessarily, because I think you're always improving, but without making really vast, huge dips and troughs of, oh, this is terrible and oh, this is brilliant. So it's kind of a strange one. I mean, it leads to this thing of like, do we want teachers who are going to specialize in a certain area? So this model that we have in a lot of primary schools where you become the reading lead and then you specialize in reading, or do we want teachers who are generally always trying to improve all elements of their practice? Yeah, I think there was a point I was going to make after that, but I totally blanked on what it was. But it's just the difference between the novice experience of CPD and the more experienced experience of CPD is vast. It's really huge. I'm not quite sure when the difference between the two is. I think 5 years is about where I am, or just gone past, is maybe where you start moving from novice into something else.
One thing I hear teaching in Germany is because I remember in the UK, everyone was really happy to kind of come into the classroom and watch each other and kind of help each other out. But here it's like, oh no, I'm really afraid that someone comes in and kind of says, oh, there hasn't, that's not good, and maybe you should improve this. So it's really a shame that you can't really have the, kind of ask someone to come and kind of help you and see, okay, maybe this is an area you can improve and stuff. So, and I think it's so important. It can help so much kind of talking to other teachers and people in school, and kind of maybe, you have a blind spot there and you can't really see that's an area where maybe, you can be even better. So I think it's so important to have kind of the exchange with other people in school too.
Yeah, I think that idea of blind spots is something we might address a little bit later, because it's certainly one of the things that I think about when I think about taking charge of my own CPD. And then there have been occasions kind of further down the line, quite in what I'd consider quite an experienced phase of my teaching career, where I feel like I'm in charge, and then just someone who comes in and notices something and just points something out, and I realise that it's something that's completely off my radar that they can see quite quickly. So yeah, I think definitely a balance to be had there. Sorry, go on.
No, it's fine. Seb actually reminded me of the point I was going to make, because when it's experienced teachers, I think I can't remember the name of the person now who does all the Goodrich talks about this. When it's experienced teachers, it's not so much about necessarily about them learning new things that they don't already do, but if you want to have a whole school culture of doing certain things in a certain way, so what Matt was talking about earlier with his, well, not even whole school, but whole trust culture of planning, these sorts of things often fall into this basket of CPD, that they're delivered through CPD or that they're part of that. And if you have teachers who you're going to allow or who will kind of opt out, passively or actively from CPD, then you're going to find it really hard to roll out certain things in a whole school or a whole trust way. You're going to find it really hard to direct that culture of your school or your trust. So quite often it's not necessarily about them learning new things or changing their practice really in a really significant way for experienced teachers, but just everyone being on the same page. And one of the things I really love about my current school that I haven't necessarily experienced elsewhere is that often in CPD, experienced teachers there don't roll their eyes, they don't make comments, they don't kind of say, this is what we've always done, this contradicts what we did a couple of years ago. They're always asking questions, they're always kind of making really good points, but they're doing it in a way that is really constructive and is based on their experience, rather than here's how my experience says this is not going to work. And that's because we have a really good culture at my school where everyone supports everyone, which is nice, but like where experienced teachers want to be part of the progression and movement of the school forward, in the same way that kind of what you might have a divide in a lot of primary schools, I think, between kind of keen beans and whatever you want to call the other category of people, reluctance. And it's just nice being in an environment where that kind of division doesn't seem to exist.
When did you realize that you could have a much bigger influence over the direction your professional development could take?
I'm happy to start. I must say I was incredibly fortunate to land on my feet as a NQT, as it was back in 2005. I went to a school where I was really well supported by my NQT mentor and the head teacher. And every time we had those kind of informal get-togethers, it was, so how's it going? So what do you want to get better at? Who would you like to see next? And those kind of things. And I realized that I was being given the ownership, the drive to have my say. It didn't mean I always got what I wanted in the order I wanted it, but I was given a voice very early on. And that for me was really eye-opening, because as a trainee in the 4 years kind of learning to be a teacher before that, I was kind of pointed in the direction of what to do next and where to go. But I was given a really great opportunity by my head teacher and deputy head teacher to have a voice and have a say about how I could improve, what I would like to see next, and also to share my opinions about how the school might improve. And ever since then, I've looked for jobs or roles where that's been the culture, that's been expected. And I hope now in my role that I can play a big part in building that culture and creating that culture for my colleagues as well. So for me, I must say I was very fortunate, because I had that, from year one as a class teacher.
I think for me, it came through going from the really structured PGC that I was on, where everything I was given to me by, the most expert person in the room, and that we were really guided through, we're going to read this research paper this week and discuss it, and this one and this one and this one. So it's a real program. I mean, probably quite similar in a way to the current ECF, where it's like we're doing this because this is what an expert has decided. And then my first year of teaching as an NQT, and to an extent, the last few months of my PGCE, I became active on Twitter, and I started to see things that were, or I started to follow my own kind of interests. And I underwent, between sort of the middle of my PGCE and halfway through my NQT year, like a complete flip, reversal of my pedagogical views and my views about education. I think that's not massively uncommon for people who've ended up kind of, on edu Twitter over the years. And that was when I realised that I can have a lot more control over it. Going to my first research ed as well, going to a conference that, I was doing it on the weekend, and I funded it myself, and I went down to London and things like that. That was all quite influential in realising that I had a lot more control over my professional development than just what was on offer at my school. Or, to be fair, the school also did offer really good CPD, and there was a lot of thought that went into it. It was alongside that. It wasn't as if I was running up against what was happening at the schools, at least in terms of pedagogy, if not culture. That was, for me, it was edu Twitter, and it was certainly Rosenshine as well, because I know, Rosenshine's a bit of a cliche these days, but this was a while ago now, and kind of in the first big wave of Rosenshine hitting Twitter. And it was that thing of like, I'm an NQT, I'm not a good teacher, I'm not very good at doing my job, and suddenly I could implement this from Rosenshine, and I could do it, over the course of a week or 2 weeks, and see proper improvement in what was going on in my classroom. And that was like a thrill. That was really exciting, that I could get better at my job really quickly. Someone told me, when does teaching get easier? And it was like, the answer is probably about 5 years into it, but at the time it felt like it was getting a little bit easier and a little bit better every week, because I was able to pick up something from Teach Like a Champion, pick up something from Rosenshine, pick up something from Twitter, from a blog, from whatever was happening at X school, and being discussed on Twitter, and try out in my classroom. And it was really fun, really exciting. I kind of miss those days, really. Those were the days. They were horrendous, because I was a secondary school teacher and I ended up going into primary. But it was a good time. It's a good time for me.
In my NQT, my second NQT internship was absolutely brilliant, because I said to her, well, I'm not really up for lessons, because I think it's not really the day-to-day work I have to do. So I said, just come in, watch me teach, and then we can discuss what should I improve. And she was up for it and said, yeah. And then, she said, okay, this is maybe an area. And then maybe she dropped in for 10 minutes or 15 minutes here. And then another day, like another 10 minutes. And so to watch certain parts of my lesson, and areas we kind of decided together we should improve. And it really made me feel like my voice is heard, and she really kind of was interested in you as well, and supported me, and then said, okay, maybe there is a CPD course you could go on. So that was absolutely brilliant. I cherish the experience so much, because I think it's important that you have someone who listens and who's not just kind of dictating and saying to you, okay, you have to do this and you have to do that, but kind of takes you on the journey and takes kind of decides with you what could be good for you to do, and to go to other people, watch and see how they do it. So that was really good, and I'm really happy about that experience.
See, I kind of come at this from a far less positive direction, because I was way later in my career before I started, to my mind at least, taking charge of what I was doing. Those who were listening earlier on would have heard me talking about my experiences with guided maths, and that being kind of like a buckaroo donkey moment, at which I realised, like the straw that broke the camel's back, effectively, where I realised that no, actually, I need to take charge of what's going on, because there's I'm not necessarily convinced by the people above me that they really know what they're doing, and there's part of that that's down to me. That's not other people's fault. I'm just someone who perhaps is a little bit too respectful towards authority figures. I just assume they know what they're talking about, and then I'm shocked when I find that they don't. So for me, that kind of obviously made a difference. I'd also say a big thing for me, and it's a common theme on Tadape, is some of the podcasts and reading that I encountered. So at about that time as well, I was given a book. It was David Didow's What If Everything You Know About Teaching Was Wrong, which, for where I was at, and again for my natural state of respecting authority figures and assuming that everything is is the way it is for a good reason, that gave me a proper kick, which was really valuable. And then following that, as we've said many times on the podcast, the Craig Barton podcasts were a pretty big deal for me, partly because they helped me recognize that there was this academic, or potentially academic, I apologize for the word, but I can't think of a better one, that intellectual edge to what I was doing, rather than it purely being about craft and experience, that there was a potential for me to get better at my job, not just in the moment, but in the theorizing about it as well, which that was quite a big deal for me, just because it suited the way I like to think about things. So yeah, podcasts and realizing that authority figures are guessing as much as I am was it for me.
I think that point you mentioned, Chris, for a lot of people is a watershed moment, that, well, there is research out there, there are books, there are experts I can go to that can show me how to do this better. I don't have to figure this out myself. This isn't just a case of I'm either a good teacher or I'm not. There's either a way of doing it or not. That there are academics out there, that there are experts out there who can guide us in our practice. And teachers can go decades in their profession without being given that kind of, have you thought about doing it this way? And sometimes those teachers who have been teaching 25, 30 years, when they get a piece of advice that opens their eyes to something, they're so grateful. They're so grateful. And then they have that moment where they go, I can't believe I've been doing it this other way for so long. But they're just so appreciative. And I was very fortunate in my role as a local authority advisor to work with people from trainee to very experienced teacher. And then I very, very rarely came across anybody who wasn't just absolutely overwhelmingly grateful to be shown, no, there is research about this. There are books, there are texts, there are videos you can watch that can show you this thing can be done in a different way. And yeah, the moment we have that realization, that I think Kieran might describe that as a threshold moment in a concept to teacher development, but you can open your eyes and, whoa, now I know that. What else is out there?
I think there's another side to that as well, which is that with an experienced teacher, they can be doing something really effective in their own classroom. And when they are introduced to bits of research on it, or some further reading about it, they go, as well as having that intuition that this works, there are other people doing this. There are other people talking about this. And sometimes I can just give them the confidence to say, actually, I'm more happy to advise other people about this. I'm more happy to say, actually, come and look at my classroom. This isn't just me doing this thing that I think is effective. It's something that is a pattern within the wider profession. So yeah, as well as changing people's practice, I think it can also embed good stuff within their practice and make them more confident in sharing that stuff. And with more experienced colleagues, I think that's, quite a common, or at least from my limited experience, that's quite a common thing that's happened.
So, I mean, Chris, you're more than welcome to ask the next question if you want, but I'm happy to too.
It depends. I mean, I've automatically slotted into the role as guest because that's how I get to do more talking.
That's fine with me. Yeah.
Yeah. You take the next question, and I'll try not to be quite so vocal.
Assistant to the co-host. I mean, teachers are time poor by default. I mean, we start every show with that exclamation. How do you manage to fit your professional development into your daily lives? Seb, I'm thinking about you, recently married, recently christened, young child. Where do you find the time?
Next question, please. I think there's definitely no one size fits all solution. So I find it extremely tricky at the moment. Like you said, it's like I'm teaching 75%. I'm very eager to kind of improve and change the way I'm teaching, especially the way I'm got involved in Edu Twitter and that kind of stuff. But obviously, I still want to have a healthy work-life balance, and I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good dad. So it's really okay, how can I do that? I feel bad sometimes because my mind is always, okay, I want to sit down and I want to read stuff, to listen to podcasts, and I want to do things to kind of improve my teaching. But then sometimes I get told off because I'm spending too much time doing it. So I think, well, for me, sometimes I think there's just, okay, I feel like now I feel like I have the mental capacity and I have the energy, so I just do it in that moment right away, and that helps. Or when I'm cooking, I'm listening to podcasts, or getting ready in the bathroom, kind of making those little moments where I have time to make the most use of that time as well. I mean, unfortunately, well, I'm lucky because I only have a 5-minute walk to my school at the moment, which doesn't give me a lot of time to kind of listen to, maybe if I had a long drive, or to listen to podcasts. But I'm trying to make the most of the time I have to kind of fit it in and kind of make it work around still being there for my family, but also kind of making sure I can do the stuff which I'm really keen and happy to do, because it's when I want to think about how can I improve my teaching, and but it's tricky.
I have the opposite of Seb, really. Have a really long commute, because I live in Southend-on-Sea in Essex and I work in central London, and that's when I listen to podcasts and I do things like that, sort of an hour and a half there, hour and a half back. And if I'm going to the gym or I'm on my way to something else, then I listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts and things. And I have ADHD. I find it really difficult to concentrate for long periods of time, or concentrate consistently for long periods of time. So I go through periods where I'm very fixated on a topic and I read a lot and listen a lot and learn a lot. And then I'll go through periods where I don't read anything about education for a long time, and I read about other things or concentrate on other parts of my life. So I think some people, I have felt a pressure in the past that I'm always consistently doing CPD every week, that it's really consistent and really steady, and allowing myself that freedom to go through long periods where I'm not interested in things and then periods where I'm really interested in things has been quite freeing. And I think you have to find your own pattern of what works. I don't do a lot during the holidays. I like holidays of hobbies and friends and sport and things like that. And so I'm changing my career now going forward from the next academic year to something quite different from what I'm doing now, hopefully. But the last however many years I've been teaching, 5 or 6 years, I haven't had that work-life balance that other people have, because I've kind of transferred all of my work life. I do it all during the week, and I do it, and the week is just work. It's just solid work. I don't do anything work and maybe rugby and gym if I'm lucky. And then the weekends and the holidays, I don't really listen to education podcasts. I don't really do, although it is the 30th of December and I've watched this stream all day. But it's normally I wouldn't do that. So it's very lumpy up and down how I interact with education.
Yeah, I think you're both talking about a similar thing there, about capacity, what we're able to do at the time, about being self-aware, being aware of our mental well-being, being aware of our work life, and all of those kind of things as well. And it takes me back to something that Gareth Metcalf was saying a few episodes previously on the What You're Reading For. Actually, sometimes I'm not reading. I'm not reading anything at the moment because I can't. I just need to focus on something else. And yeah, I take a similar view to Adam. In holiday times like now, I'm not reading anything academic. I'm not reading anything that's particularly about my professional development. But I am reading for pleasure. I've got 2 books on the go. One that will be probably like an upper key stage 2 text. I highly recommend Pax if no one's come across that before. Great book, and I'm also reading the Richard Osman, The Bullet That Missed, 3rd book in the series, because it's my holiday time. It's time for me to relax and kind of give my brain a bit of a rest from all of that as well, and to prove to myself that I really do enjoy reading and knowing about books that other people are reading and all that kind of stuff as well. And that's absolutely fine. But yeah, like said, when I have very young children. I'm only married in the last 4 years or so, and my wife's a teacher, and we both live in that world where teaching can be all-consuming. And it's the one thing you have in common with everyone around the staff room table. Yeah. So you go to an environment, and the one thing you might have in common with everyone is that we teach, and we talk about our teaching and those kind of things. And you go on your Christmas do or whatever, and everyone's talking about the classroom and that kind of stuff. It happens. So you have to give yourself permission that we can't always be reading. We can't always be listening to podcasts and watching those kind of things. But when those times do come, when we are excited to engage with our professional development, we need to make the most of it. And like Adam was saying, I'm really interested in this right now, and I'm going to strike while the iron's hot. I'm going to go for it. I've got a real period of time now where I've got the energy, I've got the capacity, I've got the enthusiasm to do this thing and go for it. And don't stretch yourself too thin. For me, I try and give myself blocks of time in which I'll look at something, but it's largely one thing. So my head at the moment, going into spring term, is thinking about how we're going to develop our curriculum about retrieval practice, how we're going to bring retrieval practice into other areas of the curriculum, not just in maths, which is the only place it exists at the moment. So I know that that's going to be the focus for my professional development, because it's going to aid me in my work and my colleagues further down the line. But that's the one thing. It's the one thing I'm going to focus on. And sure, I'll listen to a brilliant podcast like Tadapi while I'm doing the washing up or while I'm cooking, because that will keep me engaged with the other things I'm not thinking about right now. And if there are great bits, I'll bookmark them that I'll come back to later. But I kind of give myself a focus on one thing for a sustained period of time. And I've learned, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years or so, to give myself a break when I'm not in the mood for it. If I don't have the headspace for it, I'm not going to take it in. And if I do take it in, I'm going to take in 10%. So I'll give myself a break.
No, sometimes I wish, or I think I wish my partner, my husband would be a teacher as well, because then he would understand why I'm so invested and so passionate about this. But then again, I'm really happy that he's not, because he kind of grounds me again and really tells me, okay, you have to stop. It's not all about your work. You do have your personal life. You need to think about your family as well. But yeah, it's when I talk to teacher friends and they have a partner who's a teacher as well, it's always like, oh yeah, no, they can work evening and no one says anything. And I think, well, I wish I could do some work in the evening, but no, I think it's good. And I'm very happy my husband is not a teacher, and he kind of says, okay, you have to think about other stuff as well.
Yeah, I also am happy that my husband is not a teacher. When I hear stories about couples that meet, in school and things, I quite often think a little bit like Seb, that'd be nice if they understood, or that they. But no, you need having a partner who's not a teacher is very helpful in separating work life. I talk enough shop on WhatsApp and Twitter and at school, and listening to podcasts and whatever. It's nice to have someone who just not for want of trying, but has no comprehension of what I do all day in the nicest way possible.
Thinking back to when I was very busy with classroom responsibilities, I would find that the main issue that I would get is that there'd be long periods of time where I might not engage with professional development, which obviously, as you say, is totally fine. My problem would be kind of almost getting back into it. I'd find myself in a bit of a funk. And so what I tended to do was to kind of break that cycle of not engaging at all, is just find one thing I'm really interested in, even if it doesn't feel like immediately relevant to, let's say that I'm particularly worried about my questioning, but that's not what I'm most interested in reading about at that point. I'd just find something I was interested in, be it, variation theory or reading or whatever it might be. Just find something to get yourself engaged again. And it goes without saying, there are always useful ways to combine things that you do. So as has already been mentioned, like listening to podcasts while you're doing the washing up. I was caught reading a edu book while on my exercise bike, my father-in-law's exercise bike when I was in Slovakia. So often finding these little ways to just make little chunks of time. But what's interesting here is I think the key thing that sums it all up beautifully was I think when Adam said you've got to find your own pattern for this stuff. For some people, 5 minutes a day without fail, 5 minutes of if they read stories before bed, 5 minutes of reading whatever it is that you've bookmarked on Twitter, whatever paper it is or an edu book, and before you then dive into whatever else you want to read, can work, that little routine. But for others, it's a case of feast and famine. So yeah, find what works for you, and don't be too worried if it doesn't match up with what other people do.
Kieran, you've talked about this before, haven't you? Kind of that habit stacking. You're always going to have your habitual coffee at certain times of the day, or at lunchtime, or while your computer loads. So making use of that time, as my computer loads up, it takes about 4 minutes or whatever. I can read a short bit of my book in that time, or as you're doing the washing up, whatever, you can have something on in the background. Just stacking those habits together, being a bit more efficient with your time, is really helpful if you are time poor and you're thinking, I want to do this stuff, I just don't know how. Having a 5-minute thing where you stack it onto a habit that doesn't take your full attention is a really good way to get started.
I think it's also worth saying that given that we're so time poor, that I think it was mentioned earlier that what we do has to mean something. It has to be linked to something. So I've spoken before about how I use Notion, which is a kind of productivity software, to keep track of all my notes, and all my notes kind of categorized, and it's very nerdy, but like it each note, kind of the outcome of the whole process of categorizing them is that it leads to an action, a way of doing things differently, something I want to write about for my book or a blog post, or something I want to follow up on. And I found that really helpful, because when it is feast and famine, at least when it's feast, you're reading so much and doing so much that it's actually contributing to something. And also just like making notes in books, making it an active process, because I love reading and I read a lot for pleasure, and I wouldn't sit with a big fat fantasy novel and, well, sometimes I do, but make loads of notes in the margin. Whereas obviously with a book that's very rich, and I'm just looking at my kind of edu books now, they'll all have little post-its in them or notes or something like that. So it's got to be an active reading process. And that's not just what you can in Kindle. I'm obsessed with Kindle Notes, and highlights in Kindle is an amazing way of keeping track of what you're reading. In listening to podcasts, you've got Scribed, so you can pick out 3 minutes of a podcast to listen to again, or if you've got something like Instapaper, which I use, you can keep notes, and all of these devices just make it a more meaningful process. And then you're not building up just this kind of mental schema, you're actually building up an external schema as well, and you're building up a body of kind of notes and knowledge that you can then, if you decide to write a book or a blog, or to do a talk at Research Ed or whatever it is, with all of that reading that you've done, it's so much easier to access it and makes it a useful process. But then it also gives you an onus. You can't just pick up a book. You have to have a pen in hand, and you have to think, what am I going to do with this? But I've found that really useful the last few years.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think sometimes I worry when I'm reading, if it's not actively, then I worry that I'm not really going to use this, or I'm going to forget this a lot more easily than if it's connected, if that schema is a lot more developed. Like say I'm reading something that I've done quite a bit of reading on, then you can normally make those connections quite easily, or more easily.
It's also the case that a lot of edu books, in particularly edu books, are quite fluffy or they're quite padded out. And not everyone is. There are some that are just like pure meat, but a lot of them are. And it's not just edu books at all. It's a lot of economics writing is like this. A lot of anecdote and story and things kind of pad out what's essential. So Mortimer Adler, who was this sort of really interesting guy about reading, has this idea of being able to X-ray a book. So you pick up a book, you're not going to read 350 pages of it. At least I won't. My stupid ADHD brain, never going to read 350 pages about one subject. But instead, you look through the index, you look through the contents, you look through the notes and the biography, the bibliography, and then you find maybe one or two chapters, the beginning of a chapter, the end of a chapter, or just those boxes that are at the end that are like points of reflection in a lot of John Catt books. And that way you're going to miss out on all the kind of clunky anecdotes and the stories about teaching in Bradford in 1986. They're nice. Some people clearly enjoy those bits, and people clearly enjoy writing them for the amount that they seep into edu books. But you do have to kind of find the wheat for the chaff a little bit. I hope that's not too controversial to say. I'm sure there's plenty of wheat and chaff in the book that I'm writing at the moment. But yeah.
You cannot answer with the Thinking Deeply About Primary Education podcast for this next one. But where do you go when you want to improve your subject or pedagogical content knowledge?
I have loads of options now, and it wasn't always the case. I've been teaching long enough to know that it wasn't always as easy to get in contact with someone who is more expert than you. Social media has made it much easier. Lots of education researchers and people who write about education research are very keen to hear the questions you have and get in touch or point you in direction. So it'd be remiss of me to not mention Twitter and Discord. They are really useful places if you curate them well. If you have lists of people that you follow, if you have notifications for the people you want to read on, and you are willing to be bold and ask a question. Twitter and Discord become much more useful to you. Well, they do for me, I must say. If you reach out, and for people who've written about things, then follow it up. Where can I find out more about that? Is there a paper that you can recommend? And being able to say to someone like Chris or Sarah, Ambition or Peps or whatever, go, what is a beginner's version of this that I can read? Like, before I go straight into that source material that seems over my head, is there something easier that I can access? We wouldn't give a child in our class something that was way beyond their reading fluency level or way beyond what they know at the moment. So what would be a beginner's guide to that? What's a really easy introduction? And I found that I've become bolder at doing that on Twitter and Discord and going to people and saying, I want to know more about that. And I know you pointed out this paper, but I started reading it. I don't get half of what it's about. I'm not at the kind of 95% fluency level where I can take it in and, subsume it to what I already know. So where can I go for an easier version of that so I can build my knowledge from the ground up? So that's what I'd recommend.
I think for me, I always go to for subject knowledge rather than like pedagogical knowledge. I love In Our Time. I mean, I hate Melvin Bragg. Sorry to, again, be super controversial, but I love In Our Time. I love listening to those experts talk about their subject in a way that's supposed to be really accessible for kind of like university level, I guess, or college level listeners. And these days, they're super obscure, aren't they? I don't know if you've looked at In Our Time recently, but I don't even know what the titles are about, let alone the content. But if you go back into the archives, you can go back to like 1994 and listen to In Our Time on light or Buddhism rather than really specific things, and they're brilliant. And this is the same sort of format as Very Short Introductions, the book series published by Oxford that have those lovely little small format books with nice little painted covers. Very pleasing to collect and have on the shelf because they all match, except for the classics one, which is in a different size format. But anyway, they are like wonderful and they're great introduction to any subject. And they are written by experts in quite an accessible way, but also surprisingly in depth. Like the amount of knowledge in those little books is amazing because they very often are just wheat, no chaff. They're just kind of really the core knowledge. And then there's also the, I'm sorry, you're going to have to tell me what it is, Kieran, the history podcast that we all like, which is called
Short History of?
Very Short History of, thank you, which is really entertaining and has these little vignettes that play out and Kennedy assassination, Mary Rose, all these kind of history topics. But that's kind of my recommendations. There's also a podcast called Thinking Something About Primary Something, and they did an episode recently about subject knowledge, and one back in the archives about subject knowledge, which was passable. So that's worth a listen.
For me, it's probably mainly maths because I can apply that here in Germany. So what I do is I would go to the NCTM website and look at their stuff for mastery, because I think it's really good and kind of helps you. And what I really like, what I've discovered recently is those subject audits they have there. You can kind of think at certain areas of maths and kind of see examples in how you would feel teaching it or supporting children if they have any misconceptions. And then they kind of also, then later on when you thought about it, you kind of give you some pointers, how you could do it and where you could kind of find on their websites the areas to kind of look at it in more depth. And for me, research ed obviously was a big thing, and I think having the kind of getting to listen to other people and kind of challenge your thinking and kind of exchanging thoughts, it's so much, it's so worth it, and kind of helps you really kind of think about your own way of teaching and how you would like to improve or what you could do differently. And one thing, walkthroughs. I wish we could have that here in Germany. I mean, I wish I could plan him to come to our school and do a training with us, because I think it's absolutely brilliant. But at the moment, I just read it for myself and kind of try to pick a few things. Okay, that's something I want to look at. But yeah, these are the things I would go to.
I mean, that's how it starts. You've just got to put the right information under your head teacher's desk, because you start with one person reading about coaching and about how you can approach professional development across a school. But no leader is going to just make that leap without being as informed as possible. So I reckon you just selectively choose little bits, Seb, and then in 3 years' time, you'll be leading this across your whole school. I think that's the way forward.
Well, and we say it jokingly, but as a school leader, I want my teachers to do that. I want my teachers to be putting things under my nose saying, have you seen this? Do you know about this? Could we do this kind of thing? And I might say, we can't do it right now, but I'd love that if my colleagues were doing that. That'd be great, because you can't be everywhere, can you? Especially in primary, you can't be on top of everything. So if you've got a team of people looking out for the best stuff, then even better.
I think there's also an unspoken element to all of this that we haven't really talked about in terms of guiding our own CPD, is that by guiding our own CPD, I think everyone here and everyone that's spoken on the podcast, and most of the guests on the podcast, have also been able to guide their own career as well. Like, if I hadn't pursued the interest that I pursued, then I wouldn't be at the stage that I'm at with the amount of opportunities that I have. And, I'm pretty early on in teaching generally, but I got to do some really exciting things last year, and some things that kind of someone at my stage of my career and at my age probably wouldn't have had available to me before kind of Twitter. But also, like, it's just been amazing. It's been incredible. And all of that is because I did take that handle of what I was doing, and I guided myself to where I wanted to be, and put a bit of kind of I don't want to say force behind it, but like, I knew I had some goals and knew what I wanted to do, and part of that was learning about this, and this allowed me to do that, and I made connections across the whole thing. And this whole network, this whole community that we're part of through TDAPE has kind of I don't know, really, it's allowed a lot of people to do things or have experiences or meet people or gain knowledge from people or find out about things that there's just no way that happened in the past. And it's also good for the greater good, because then you're having people with genuine interest and real kind of connections going out, like yourself, Tom, or like Matt or Kieran or someone like that, going out and sharing that knowledge with other schools and going into leadership. And you could even say that across the national picture as well, the way that education has developed nationally in the last 10 years, not all good, not all bad, but probably many of the good things have come out of this kind of self-directed, I suppose you could call it grassroots approach to education. It's been really exciting, and it kind of feels a bit dirty to talk about because career is inevitably linked to money and whatever. But actually, yeah, it's really, when you look back on kind of, I'm sure most people will feel like this, when you look back upon the opportunities that you've had, for me, the last year, the big thing was speaking at national conference, at Research Ed National Conference, and that was a huge career highlight that would never have come about if it wasn't for meeting specific people and learning specific things and sharing that knowledge that I had.
Yeah, well said, Owen. You got to put yourself out there.
Absolutely echo that. Yeah, I'm not without edgy Twitter. A lot of the opportunities I've had, bits and pieces here or there, wouldn't really have come about. Just to add on a couple of final things, Stuart Tiffany in the comments, I know it came up on the screen, mentioned the value of subject associations, which I think has been mentioned, but I'll just re-emphasize that. And alongside that, while no organization that tries to do something as large in scope is ever going to get everything right, I do think that the EEF is a really good place to turn as a jumping off point in all sorts of subjects. Often a little blog here can then lead to an evidence overview, which then takes you into the subject. And like I say, you don't have to agree with every little thing that they do to see the value in the role that they play. So if in doubt, going there, I mean, I think there's an American equivalent, the EIS, which puts out kind of like, I think it's linked to the What Works Clearinghouse. I might be wrong about that. But there are overviews that give you a really nice jumping off point. And I think the EEF is, alongside the subject associations, are a pretty good place to start, particularly thinking about some of their recent stuff relating to implementation and professional development. So yeah, if in doubt, check them out.
Yeah, the What Works, it's been a while since I checked it out. I think sometimes it does take a bit of critical analysis of the sources. I mean, anything's like that. And basically, you don't go to the EF and say, I'm just going to accept this without question, So I think the same applies to the What Works Clearinghouse. But yeah, really good starting point for CPD and things. I think this has been a fantastic chat. We're not even halfway through the questions, I don't think. But we got at least... No, we missed one, but it's absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thanks, Kieran.
No doubt you'll agree that was a fascinating chat with lots of ideas for the ways in which we can take control of our professional development. I know Tadabe listeners are keen to be in control of their professional development and lots of food for thought. All I said to do is say, until next time, thanks for listening.